My guest today is Greene, the American theoretical physicist, mathematician, and string theorist, with the Washington Post naming you the single best explainer of abstruse concepts in the world today. Against astounding odds, we are here, and moreover, we are so exquisitely configured that we can think about the past, we can envision the future. Some members of our species can write the Ninth Symphony, or create the pyramids, or paint the Mona Lisa, or figure out quantum mechanics. So that gives me just a sense of deep gratitude that we are here, a gratitude that kind of borders on reverence. And we should all have that sense. Look at how amazing it is that entropy and evolution can combine together to yield these kinds of cogitating structures that only exist on the cosmic timeline for a mere moment, but we are that moment. Celebrate that. That, to me, is the way to not feel that bleakness about where the universe is headed. You need to look at the world in a variety of different ways, right? So the physicist looks at it in terms of the ingredients and the laws. The chemist puts those together into atoms and molecules, and the biologist then cells and life, and so on. And the act of engaging with the world through building that car engine or doing the laboratory course is another way of touching and engaging and being part of the reality. And I think you need it all. So at times you do need to be pulled away from the big ideas, because ultimately the work is right down here in the gutter, in the dirt. That's where you make the progress. When you are at the forefront of research and you are grabbing hold of the reins of reality, able to lift 1 million tons of rock into the sky, which is what an atomic bomb can do. It's intoxicating, and you can easily put aside the ethical ramifications of what you're working on, but ultimately, as a human being, you come back to it. And these individuals, at least a good number of them from the Manhattan Project, did come back to the realization of what their work had wrought on the world. There's no way to stop research. There's no way to stop exploration. That's who we are. That's where we come from. And that's our lifeblood. And it's also the great opportunities that we have for the future. And you can't not pursue those opportunities for fear of the side effects that could be devastating. The universe is just left with a bath of particles floating through the darkness. All structure has disintegrated, and there's nothing but particles and the void. There was a time when I would think about the far future, and it would feel bleak. It would give me this hollow sense of dread that was unpleasant and uncomfortable. But as I thought about it more and more, I had a radical turn of perspective, which is the recognition that we are small, we are finite, and that can make you feel insignificant. But at the same time, look at what these collections of particles can do, and look at how unlikely it is that these collections of particles exist. You and I are the product of a sequence of quantum events reaching back to the Big Bang, each of which could have turned out differently, that way instead of this, yielding a world in which we would not be here. Fundamentally, as kids, we are scientists. We are curious about the world. Why does a kid smash things together, break things apart? To figure out what's inside and how it works. And there's a drive to really engage and understand things deeply. And what happens in the educational system is we kind of stamp out that insight, that curiosity, by virtue, I feel, of spending too much time on assessment and testing and quizzes as opposed to the big wondrous ideas. So when an audience member or member of the public has an opportunity to read a book or watch a Stephen Colbert where it's focused on big ideas, I think it reignites that childlike instinct to want to know that is inside of all of us. Our brain evolved to survive, and it became well equipped at thinking about the world in terms that aided that survival. But the truth of how the world works and the things that you need to have in your brain in order to survive, that's two different things. And therefore, what we have in mind and our intuitions may not be aligned with the true nature of the world. And that's why it takes dedicated study and exploration to break through these intuitions instilled over 100,000 generations or more and catch a glimpse of the real nature of the world. And Einstein, of course,
was the genius at this. He would take the things that everybody took for granted and wipe them away, rethink them, resulting in time that elapses at different rates if we're in relative motion, space and time that can warp and curve, and in fact meld into each other, creating what you described, the space-time continuum, showing that there's a deep connection between these two ideas that at first sight seem different. Look, I think as you well know, these subjects are hard, and the only way you can get through them is if you have a passion for the material. In fact, I tell students when they come to me and they're struggling between physics and another subject, I often tell them, if you can do another subject, you may want to do that, because to succeed in physics requires, I was working 14, 15 hours a day when I was a graduate student at Oxford. It's the only way to really make headway and to make a difference. I was not the kind of kid who went for the chemistry set or build things. I was totally a math kid. And when I got to college, I did everything that I could to avoid any kind of course where you had to touch anything whatsoever. So I somehow wiggled my way through the requirements. I never took a laboratory course. And I regret it to this day, because that tangible quality of physics, when you're actually looking at the world with your math, but then touching the world and examining the world, I think that's a vital part of the education, and I kind of missed out on that. I have long felt, and my research and reading over the last few decades has only confirmed my belief, that there is a false sense that physics and science more generally is off there on the side, right? It gives us some insights into the world, but we only pay attention if it gives us a new iPhone or new kind of gadget. But the reality is there's a continuum of these ideas, and our insights into the nature of ingredients, the particles, and the laws does illuminate these big questions of meaning, of existence, of consciousness, of free will. And so I felt that it was appropriate to consider these age-old questions, but from the standpoint of someone who looks at the world through the lens of physics. Well, I have a deep affection for Einstein, and look, he was a smart dude, man. It's astounding when you look at our understanding of the world before him and after him. He changes our understanding of space, time, matter, energy, and gravity, right? That's a lot of stuff for one person to sort of reach out and reshape and remold.
If he hadn't been born,
Right.
what would have happened?
Well, it's hard to say. With the special theory of relativity, his discovery in 1905 of the weirdness of space and time, there were others hot on the trail of that idea. In fact, Lorentz and Poincaré, other great thinkers of the time, wrote down the key equations of relativity before Einstein did. They just didn't understand what the equations were actually telling us about the world. Einstein's genius was to be able to throw away preconceived notions of space and time, look at the equations fresh, and interpret them in a radically new way, and that's why he is credited with the special theory of relativity. But I can't imagine that Lorentz and Poincaré wouldn't ultimately have gotten to that theory if Einstein had not gotten there first. Some people say, well, there was this mathematician named David Hilbert who actually wrote down the equations of general relativity perhaps before Einstein, within a few days. But Einstein went to Hilbert in June of 1915 and told him everything that he'd already figured out. Hilbert went from there between June of 1915 and November to finish the final step, but he wouldn't have gotten to June of 1915 by himself. So again, it really was Einstein all the way on the general theory of relativity.
Wow, would we have an atomic bomb in the 40s without Einstein?
I think so. I'm quite certain that others would have come to these ideas. So I do think that we would have had quantum physics, so I suspect that we would have had an atomic bomb. In fact, Einstein himself was deeply saddened by the fact that he was sometimes called the father of the atomic bomb. He was called that because he wrote the famous letter to Roosevelt about the need to try to build this weapon, and E equals mc squared is an equation that people use to determine atomic yields. But he wasn't driving the atomic bomb, and to call him the father of the atomic bomb was really incorrect.
Would you have loved to be on the Manhattan Project in some way or not? And what do you make of all that?
Wow, I've never been asked that. And what's my gut reaction? My gut reaction is that if I was there at the time and I had the opportunity to go, I would have gone, because it really would have felt being part of a group of individuals seeking to grasp matter and energy at the deepest possible level. I think I would probably have had the naive hope, because that's how I am, that we would never use this weapon. Just the threat of this weapon, or maybe just the demonstration of this weapon, would be enough. I would have been probably overly optimistic about what we would do with the results of this research, and therefore I think I would have been part of it. We hope that it's not an unrealistic way of looking at the world. We hope that, the mutual assured destruction policy is enough to keep people from pushing the button. But when you have certain leaders in the world, such as those that are prominent in the American system at the moment, you need to question whether that kind of rational thinking would hold sway in a very difficult and perhaps
I hear a lot about sinners. Don't think that I'll be the same, but I might go down to the river, 'cause the way that the sky opens